I am Maya, 34 years old, and my life was a lie. I spent my 20s building my husband's brokerage firm, playing the perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect daughter. When I caught him in bed with a 22-year-old intern, I packed my 3 children into my car and drove through freezing rain to the one place I thought was safe. My father opened the door, looked at his shivering grandchildren, and called me an embarrassment. My own mother told me to go back and apologize to the man who broke my heart. As the oak door slammed in my face, leaving us in the cold, I did not cry. I picked up my garbage bag, walked back to my car, and whispered 3 words that became my ultimate revenge. Just wait, watch. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build an empire from a broken heart and turned your pain into power. It was Thanksgiving weekend 2 years ago when the illusion shattered. I had just returned early from a crisis management conference in Washington, D.C., eager to surprise him. As a senior PR director, I handled corporate disasters, but nothing prepared me for the disaster in my master bedroom. I walked in to find Marcus tangled in our sheets with his receptionist. He just told me to calm down, acting as if I was the one interrupting his schedule. I walked straight to the kids' rooms, packed warm clothes into a plastic garbage bag, and buckled Malik, Kayla, and Trey into my SUV. The drive across Atlanta was a blur of freezing rain. My father, Deacon, was a prominent pastor and respected businessman. Every Sunday he preached about protection, love, and support. I genuinely believed those sermons applied to me. I pulled up to their sprawling brick mansion just past midnight. The house was blazing with lights. I dragged the bag up the stone steps, shielding 5-year-old Trey from the wind while Malik and Kayla huddled close. I rang the bell, desperate for warmth. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal my father. He wore custom silk pajamas, holding a tumbler of expensive bourbon. His eyes darted from me to his 3 freezing grandchildren. He did not step aside to let us in. "Maya, what are you doing making a scene on my porch at this hour?" he demanded. "Marcus is cheating on me," I said, my voice shaking from the cold. "I caught him in our bed. I just need a place to stay with the kids." Footsteps echoed through the grand foyer. Chloe, my brother Jamal's white wife, appeared behind him, holding a crystal glass of champagne. Chloe never missed an opportunity to remind me of my place. "Oh my God, Maya," she sighed loudly. "Every man strays sometimes. You are making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing." I stared at her. "I just caught my husband with another woman, Chloe. We are freezing. Please just let the kids inside." Chloe looked down her nose at my children. "Jamal and I are hosting 3 major real estate investors tomorrow morning," she said coldly. "We just had the Italian leather sofas professionally cleaned. I am not having wet children running around ruining the aesthetic of our investor weekend. You need to take them back home." I looked to my father, expecting him to pull us inside, but Deacon just cleared his throat and looked away. My mother, Beatrice, descended the grand staircase. She walked up behind Chloe and looked at me with pure disappointment. Beatrice did not ask if I was okay. "Chloe is right," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "You have always been far too impulsive, Maya. Marcus is the CEO of a successful brokerage firm. He provides for you. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a divorced daughter in our social circle? Go back home, apologize to your husband, and fix your marriage. Do not bring this shame to our doorstep." I stood there, the freezing rain soaking my coat. They cared more about leather sofas and country club gossip than the safety of my children. They saw me as nothing but a dependent housewife throwing a tantrum. They thought I had nowhere else to go, that I was completely powerless without a man to fund my existence. Deacon stepped forward. "You heard your mother," he said. "Go home, Maya. Grow up." He grabbed the brass handle and slowly, deliberately closed the heavy oak door right in my face. The click of the deadbolt echoed loudly in the freezing night. I stood on the porch, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter returning inside. Kayla tugged on my coat, her small voice trembling as she asked if we were going to sleep in the car. I looked down at my 3 beautiful children, and in that exact second, every drop of sorrow in my body evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, unshakable focus. I bent down and picked up the wet garbage bag, feeling the icy rain mix with the last tear I would ever shed for these people. I did not bang on the door. I did not beg them to reconsider. I took my children by their freezing hands and walked back down the slick stone steps toward the dark driveway, leaving my past behind me forever. As I buckled them safely into the car and started the engine, I looked back at that blazing brick mansion. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered the 3 words that would become the foundation of my entire empire. Just wait, watch. They had no idea that while Marcus held the title of CEO, my name was on the shadow accounts funding his entire operation. I drove away fully ready to burn their perfectly curated lives to the ground and build my very own. The silence Marcus experiences after the phone line goes dead is absolute. Maya does not waste a single second gloating. She immediately sets the next phase of her plan into motion. She relocates her children to a secure private luxury lease paid for entirely in cash through a shell corporation. For years, Marcus and his pretentious mother Evelyn painted Maya as a fortunate charity case who married into their supposed generational wealth. They constantly reminded her of her modest upbringing at every holiday gathering, ensuring she felt utterly dependent on the family name. Maya let them believe their own narrative while she quietly built a financial fortress they could not even fathom. The backlash arrives less than 48 hours later. Maya is seated at a quiet corner table in a high-end bistro, finalizing enrollment paperwork for her children's new private school when Evelyn marches into the restaurant. Marcus's mother is flanked by his aggressive older brother Julian. They do not know about the Phoenix Fund yet. They only know Marcus is panicking about frozen capital and that Maya has vanished from the family home. Evelyn slams her designer handbag onto Maya's table, knocking over a glass of sparkling water. She loudly declares that Maya is a vindictive, unstable woman trying to extort her successful son. Evelyn demands that Maya return the children to their rightful home, immediately threatening to deploy the family's lawyers to strip Maya of custody and leave her penniless in the streets. Maya calmly wipes the spilled water from her enrollment documents using a linen napkin. She does not raise her voice or shed a single tear. Instead, she looks Evelyn directly in the eye and asks if Julian has checked the family trust portfolio recently. Julian scoffs, calling her a gold digger grasping at straws. Maya slides a sleek black folder across the table. Inside are legally binding documents proving that Marcus did not just lose his operating capital. To cover his massive gambling debts and lavish gifts for his young intern, he secretly leveraged the family's ancestral estate. And the entity holding that debt is none other than a subsidiary of Maya's wealth management firm. The color drains from Evelyn's face as Julian frantically reads the documents. Maya explains with chilling precision that she is not extorting anyone. She is simply foreclosing on a delinquent asset. She gives them exactly 30 days to vacate the estate they have proudly flaunted for decades. The entire restaurant watches in stunned silence as the untouchable matriarch of the family realizes her entire lifestyle is now legally owned by the daughter-in-law she treated like garbage. Maya stands up, leaves a $100 bill on the table to cover the water, and walks out, leaving Evelyn and Julian speechless in the center of the dining room. The conflict continues to escalate the following week. Marcus, desperate and backed into a corner, attempts a public smear campaign. He goes to their mutual friends and the local country club elite, spinning a tale of a neglected husband dealing with an erratic, greedy wife. He posts a tearful video on social media claiming Maya kidnapped his children and is trying to ruin his legitimate business out of pure spite. His young intern Chloe even chimes in, posting passive-aggressive updates about true love conquering toxic ex-wives. The comments flood in with Marcus's wealthy circle condemning Maya's supposedly toxic behavior. He thinks public pressure will force her to negotiate a favorable settlement. He severely underestimates her preparation. Maya counters his public display with absolute undeniable facts. She does not post a video or engage in emotional mudslinging. She utilizes her PR expertise to orchestrate a strategic leak to the city's premier financial journal. The exposed details: Marcus's gross mismanagement of client funds, his morality clause violations, and the fact that his brokerage has been financially insolvent for months. The article includes heavily redacted, but irrefutable proof of his embezzlement to fund his illicit affairs and gambling habits. Maya ensures the release is perfectly timed for Monday morning, right before the stock market opens, maximizing the professional damage. The fallout is instantaneous and brutal. Marcus's remaining investors panic and pull their backing. The country club elite who were defending him hours earlier suddenly distance themselves to avoid being implicated in his financial scandal. Marcus's phone rings incessantly, not with messages of support, but with furious clients demanding their money back. Even Chloe, realizing her wealthy catch is actually drowning in debt, publicly dumps him and gives an exclusive interview claiming she was manipulated. Marcus tries to call Maya, leaving frantic voicemails, begging her to retract the story, promising he will end the affair and do whatever she wants. Maya deletes the messages unheard. She is entirely focused on securing a joyful, peaceful life for her children far removed from the toxic environment they left behind. But Marcus is not completely finished. Driven by absolute desperation and egged on by his furious mother, he decides to play his final, most despicable card. He tracks down Maya's biological father, a man who abandoned her when she was a toddler, and pays him to file a fraudulent lawsuit claiming Maya stole the seed money for her company from him decades ago. It is a pathetic, transparent attempt to freeze Maya's assets and tie her up in endless, draining litigation. When Maya receives the legal notice, she realizes Marcus will never stop trying to drag her back down to his level. She knows it is time to deliver the final crushing blow that will permanently dismantle his ability to ever threaten her or her children again. Maya does not panic when the process server hands her the lawsuit. Instead, she invites her lead attorney to her new sun-drenched office overlooking the city skyline. They review the baseless claims made by her estranged father. Marcus assumed that bringing her childhood trauma into the public eye would paralyze Maya with shame. He believed the stigma of a broken home would force her into hiding. He forgot that Maya had spent her entire adult life turning her vulnerabilities into armor. She instructs her legal team not to settle, not to delay, but to accelerate the discovery process. She wants Marcus to testify under oath. She wants every single financial transaction between Marcus and her estranged father exposed on the public record. The dominoes continue to fall exactly as she arranged them. While Marcus drains his last remaining credit lines to pay for his aggressive legal representation, Maya quietly acquires the commercial building that houses Marcus's now failing brokerage. She becomes his landlord overnight. She does not send an eviction notice immediately. She waits until the exact moment he schedules an emergency meeting with his few remaining investors to pitch a desperate recovery plan. The trap is perfectly set, waiting for him to step right into the center of it. I parked outside a budget motel just off the interstate. The neon vacancy sign buzzed against the freezing rain, casting a harsh red light into the cramped room. I tucked Malik, Kayla, and Trey into the two stiff double beds, pulling the thin blankets up to their chins. They fell asleep instantly, exhausted by the cold and the sheer confusion of the night. I did not sleep. I sat at the small laminate desk in the corner, opened my laptop, and began dismantling my husband's life piece by piece. At 7 in the morning, my phone vibrated against the cheap wood. The screen flashed Marcus's name. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass to answer. I expected him to sound apologetic or perhaps defensive after being caught in the act. Instead, his voice dripped with the exact same arrogant condescension my mother had used on the porch hours earlier. "Maya, it is time to stop this ridiculous tantrum." Marcus sighed into the receiver, sounding utterly bored by my trauma. "You took the children out in the middle of a freezing storm because you caught me blowing off some steam. It was a mistake with a 22-year-old intern. It meant absolutely nothing. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing my firm." I stayed perfectly silent, listening to his shallow, arrogant breathing. "Since you want to act like a reckless child, I am treating you like one," he continued, his tone hardening with malice. "I woke up early today and called the bank. I have frozen all of your credit cards. I transferred every single cent out of our joint checking and savings accounts into a private trust. You do not have a dime to your name, Maya. You cannot even buy breakfast for the kids this morning. I expect you to pack up, drive back to our house, and beg for my forgiveness for overreacting. If you promise to be a good, supportive wife, I might unlock your grocery allowance by Monday." He paused, waiting for my tears. He waited for the panic, the desperation, the frantic apologies of a woman who believed she was completely financially trapped. He expected me to shatter under the weight of his control. Instead, I took a slow sip of the terrible motel coffee I had brewed an hour earlier. "Marcus," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's scalpel, "have you checked your company's primary operating account this morning?" "What are you talking about?" he snapped, clearly annoyed that I was not crying and begging. "My company accounts are none of your business. You are just a PR manager. Do not try to change the subject." I smiled, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. "Open your banking portal, Marcus. Do it right now while I am on the phone." I heard the rustle of sheets on the other end, probably the same expensive sheets he had ruined hours before. I heard the clicking of his keyboard. Marcus was the charming face of his high-profile Atlanta brokerage. He schmoozed the wealthy clients, he played golf at the country club, and he took all the credit for the firm's meteoric rise. But Marcus was terrible with actual money. 7 years ago, when his firm was on the brink of absolute bankruptcy, I secretly orchestrated his primary backing. I did not use his family's money. I used my own private savings and a brilliant network of silent investors to create the Phoenix Fund, a limited liability company that I solely controlled. The Phoenix Fund owned 80% of his operating capital. I was not just his wife. I was his biggest investor, his shadow board, and his ultimate boss. The sound of Marcus's breathing suddenly stopped. A sharp, panicked gasp echoed through the phone. "Maya," he stammered, the arrogance instantly draining from his voice. "Maya, the accounts are empty. The payroll account, the expansion fund, the operating capital. It is all gone. The bank says the Phoenix Fund initiated a total capital withdrawal at 6 in the morning. What did you do?" "Yes," I replied smoothly. "That would be correct." "You need to call them," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Maya, you have to call your contacts at the Phoenix Fund. Tell them it is a mistake. If I do not have that capital by Monday morning, the SEC will audit me. I will be completely insolvent. I will lose the firm." I leaned back in the cheap motel chair. "I do not need to call anyone, Marcus. I own the Phoenix Fund. I have always owned it. And according to the ironclad morality clause buried on page 47 of your funding contract, which you were too lazy to read before signing, I have the absolute right to pull my investment instantly if the CEO engages in behavior that threatens the public image of the firm. Sleeping with a 22-year-old intern in your marital bed while your company is preparing for a public offering is a massive PR liability. "You cannot do this to me," he screamed, the reality of his total ruin finally crashing down on him. "I am your husband. I am the father of your children. You are destroying my life over one stupid mistake. You stopped being my husband the second you brought another woman into my home," I said coldly. "And you proved exactly what kind of father you are when you tried to starve your own children this morning just to teach me a lesson about obedience." "Maya, please," he begged, his voice breaking into frantic, pathetic sobs. "Please, I am sorry. I will fire her. I will go to counseling. I will do whatever you want. I will get on my knees. Please do not destroy me." I looked over at Malik, Kayla, and Trey, sleeping peacefully in the dim morning light. "I am not destroying you, Marcus. I am simply removing my safety net and letting you face the consequences of your own actions. Enjoy your bankruptcy." I pressed the end call button, cutting off his desperate crying. I did not hesitate for a single second. I immediately removed the SIM card from my phone and snapped it in half. I threw it into the motel trash can. I packed up my laptop, woke my children with gentle kisses, and promised them we were going on a grand adventure. Within an hour, I had purchased new prepaid phones for myself and the kids, completely severing all ties with Marcus, my parents, Chloe, Jamal, and the entire toxic network in Atlanta. I loaded my family into the SUV, merged onto the northbound interstate, and disappeared into the wind, heading straight toward Chicago to build an empire they could never touch. The drive up north was grueling, but absolutely necessary. I rented a highly secure apartment in the South Loop of Chicago. The biting winter wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, a sharp contrast to the humid Georgia heat we had left behind, but to me it felt like pure freedom. I enrolled Malik, Kayla, and Trey in a rigorous private school under my maiden name. I wanted them safe, focused, and entirely insulated from the inevitable fallout that was about to hit Atlanta. Once I knew their daily routines were secure and their smiles had returned, I locked myself in my home office and went to war. I did not spend a single second crying over my broken marriage or my fractured family. Grief is a luxury for those who do not have an empire to build. I tapped into the substantial capital I had safely shielded within the Phoenix Fund. While Marcus was busy facing federal audits and humiliating public exposure down south, I was ruthlessly analyzing market trends in the Midwest. The commercial real estate sector was taking a massive hit, and several mid-tier investment firms were drowning in bad debt. I began buying up distressed corporate assets for pennies on the dollar. I moved with absolute precision and complete anonymity, operating through a complex web of corporate entities so no one could trace the acquisitions back to a newly divorced single mother. Within 8 months of relentless 14-hour workdays, I leveraged those rehabilitated assets to secure a majority stake in Vanguard Holdings, a massive private equity firm. I transitioned from a behind-the-scenes crisis manager into the chairwoman of a billion-dollar portfolio. I hired the sharpest legal minds and the most aggressive financial analysts in the city. I became the exact powerhouse my family always told me a black woman could never be. Meanwhile, the foundation of my family back in Atlanta was rotting from the inside out. For decades, I had been their designated scapegoat. I was the one who absorbed their criticism, fixed their messes, and silently kept the peace so they could shine. Without me there to deflect their toxicity, they had no choice but to turn on each other. My brother Jamal had always been the golden child, the supposed financial prodigy of the family. But his reality was vastly different from his carefully curated reputation. Jamal was desperate to keep up with his white wife Chloe and her faux aristocratic demands. Chloe expected seasonal trips to Aspen, a revolving door of designer wardrobes and lavish country club memberships that far exceeded Jamal's actual income as a regional developer. After Marcus's firm collapsed so publicly, Chloe became obsessed with ensuring she and Jamal were viewed as the successful, untouchable branch of the family. She threw extravagant networking parties and demanded Jamal secure a massive new luxury real estate project to elevate their social status. To fund Chloe's delusions of grandeur, Jamal began making incredibly reckless investments. He took out massive high-interest loans from secondary lenders to finance luxury condo projects that completely lacked proper zoning approvals. When those poorly planned projects stalled, he did not downsize or admit defeat. He doubled down. He started shifting money from one bad investment to cover the exorbitant interest on another, creating a textbook Ponzi scheme right under our parents' noses. He needed cash fast, and he needed it from sources that would not ask too many questions about his failing business model. And what were my parents doing while their golden boy dug his own grave? They were doing what they always did, playing pretend. My father Deacon continued to stand at the pulpit of his megachurch every Sunday, wearing custom-tailored suits and preaching hollow sermons about generational wealth and family unity. My mother Beatrice sat proudly in the front row in her expensive hats, soaking up the admiration of the congregation. They were so fiercely obsessed with projecting the image of the perfect, flawless African-American family that they completely ignored the glaring red flags in Jamal's business. Whenever a rumor surfaced in the community about Jamal's unpaid contractors or stalled construction sites, Deacon would aggressively shut it down. He used his pastoral influence to silence the critics enabling Jamal's fraud because admitting his son was a failure would irreparably damage his brand. They were all living in a fragile house of cards, completely oblivious to the hurricane gathering up north. During those 19 months of total silence, they assumed I was struggling to survive. They told their wealthy social circle that I was suffering a severe mental breakdown, that I was too ashamed of my divorce to show my face in public. They needed to believe I was broken to justify their own profound cruelty. They convinced themselves that the wet garbage bag I carried out of their house was the only thing I had left in this world. They had no idea that I was not just surviving. I was actively monitoring their collapse. My analysts at Vanguard Holdings tracked every single bad loan Jamal took out. When his debts became toxic enough, the original lenders packaged them up and sold them off to larger firms to minimize their massive losses. I saw the opportunity, and I did not hesitate. I instructed my acquisition team to quietly purchase Jamal's entire distressed debt portfolio. My brother had borrowed millions to impress his shallow wife and maintain a fake empire, and now he owed every single dime of it directly to me. I sat in my Chicago penthouse watching their financial ruin unfold on my secure servers, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The flight to Atlanta was a stark departure from the desperate freezing drive I had taken 19 months prior. I did not arrive in a packed minivan clutching garbage bags filled with children's clothes. I flew on a private charter reviewing corporate acquisition files while sipping espresso. I stepped out of a black chauffeured SUV directly in front of the Ritz-Carlton downtown. I handed my coat to the valet and adjusted the lapels of my custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The fabric was a deep, powerful emerald green fitting perfectly across my shoulders. I wore no flashy logos, no desperate cries for validation. I wore the quiet, undeniable weight of absolute financial authority. My hair was styled in sleek, immaculate waves, and my posture was forged from steel. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom, and the space was dripping in excessive, frantic luxury. It was the physical manifestation of my family's obsession with projecting an untouchable image to the affluent Atlanta community. Towering floral arrangements of imported white orchids dominated every table. Ice sculptures melted slowly under the warm ambient lighting. A string quartet played classical arrangements in the corner. Deacon and Beatrice were holding court near the center of the room, greeting local politicians and wealthy church members, pretending to be the perfect patriarch and matriarch. Jamal stood near the bar, sweating slightly through his custom tuxedo, trying to impress a group of investors who looked visibly bored with his pitch. The moment the doors closed behind me, the immediate vicinity went completely dead silent. Heads turned in my direction. Whispers rippled rapidly through the well-dressed crowd. I was supposed to be the disgraced, destitute daughter hiding in shame in a budget apartment somewhere. The narrative my parents had spun painted me as a broken woman, entirely dependent on their eventual mercy. Instead, I commanded the entire room without saying a single word. Before I could even take a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, my younger sister, Nia, intercepted me. Nia had always been my mother's eager shadow, desperate for the validation I had long stopped seeking. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of the exact same toxic judgment that had driven me away in the winter rain. "Maya, what on earth are you doing showing up here looking like that?" Nia hissed, grabbing my elbow and trying to pull me toward a dimly lit alcove near the service doors. "Did you rent that suit just to come beg for a handout tonight? You look ridiculous trying to play dress up. You need to go hide in the back room right now." Chloe invited half of the country club and some serious old money investors to this launch. "You are going to completely ruin the aesthetic of the party if people figure out who you are and start asking questions about your messy divorce." I gently but firmly detached my arm from her frantic grip. I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve. "I was invited, Nia, and I assure you my aesthetic is exactly where it needs to be." Before Nia could fire back another insult, Chloe glided over. She was draped in a heavy, ostentatious couture gown and wearing a massive diamond necklace that I immediately recognized as a high-quality cubic zirconia replica. She linked her arm through Nia's, presenting a united front of mean girls ready to put the family scapegoat back in her place. "Well, look who finally crawled out of hiding." Chloe laughed, a sharp grating sound designed to make several nearby guests turn their heads in our direction. I told Jamal it was a complete waste of expensive postage to send an invitation to your current address, but he has such a bleeding heart for charity cases. "Tell me, Maya, how is the daily struggle of being a broke single mother? I heard Marcus is practically engaged to his beautiful new assistant. It must be so incredibly hard watching everyone else upgrade their lives while you hit rock bottom." The old Maya would have crumbled under the weight of that public humiliation. The old Maya would have let those words pierce her heart, internalizing the deep shame they were trying to force onto my shoulders. but standing there feeling the cool condensation on my crystal glass, I felt absolutely nothing but clinical amusement. I looked at Chloe's fake diamonds. I looked at Jamal across the room, nervously checking his phone every 30 seconds because his creditors were breathing down his neck. They were standing in a ballroom they could not afford, drinking expensive champagne paid for with maxed-out credit cards, trying to humiliate the very woman who literally owned their entire debt portfolio. Vanguard Holdings had recently finalized the acquisition of Jamal's toxic loans. If I snapped my fingers, the bank would foreclose on the very ground he was standing on. Yet here was his wife offering me a fraction of my own birthright, acting like a savior. Chloe stepped a fraction closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, feigning deep pity for the audience of wealthy guests standing a few feet away. Listen to me, Maya. We all know you are completely desperate right now. Jamal and I want to help you keep your kids out of the homeless shelter. Jamal is willing to write you a personal check for $10,000 tonight, cash in hand. All you have to do is sign a tiny legal waiver releasing your portion of your grandfather's trust fund over to his control. He needs to restructure some minor family assets for this new luxury real estate project. $10,000 is more money than you have seen in 2 long years. Be smart for once in your life, and take the handout before we change our minds. It was a masterclass in gaslighting and financial manipulation. The audacity was breathtaking. They were trying to steal my children's future to fund their fake aristocracy. They honestly believed $10,000 would blind me to the fact that my grandfather's untouchable trust was worth over $6 million. They thought my trauma and supposed poverty had made me stupid, desperate, and compliant. They assumed the crushing weight of single motherhood had broken my spirit. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The carbonation burned pleasantly in my throat. I looked Chloe directly in the eyes, my expression utterly unreadable. I let the silence stretch out between us, watching her false confidence waver for a fraction of a second as she waited for my tearful gratitude. I did not argue, I did not yell. I simply stood my ground and let them continue to dig their own graves right in front of the affluent guests they were trying so desperately to impress. Every single insult they hurled at me was just another nail in their financial coffin. I absorbed their mockery, calculating the exact moment I would bring their entire fragile ecosystem crashing down to the polished marble floor. I let them feel powerful, knowing that true power never needs to announce itself. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water, letting the silence stretch tightly between Chloe and me. I watched the false confidence waver in her pale eyes as she waited eagerly for my tearful gratitude. Before she could open her mouth, another carefully crafted insult. My parents swooped in from the surrounding crowd. Beatrice and Deacon materialized beside me like 2 well-dressed vultures sensing a rare opportunity to feast. My mother did not greet me warmly. She did not ask how her grandchildren were doing or where we had been living for 19 long months today. Instead, she reached out and aggressively dug her manicured nails deep into my bicep. Her physical grip was surprisingly strong, driven by a frantic, desperate need to maintain absolute control over the escalating situation. "Get out of the main hall right now, Maya," my mother hissed, keeping her voice dangerously low so the nearby wealthy investors would not hear the toxic venom dripping from her words. "You are completely ruining the high society aesthetic of this entire launch party with your sullen attitude. We are going to the private drawing room, and you are going to sign that document immediately. You must sign it for your brother before you embarrass us any further today." I did not resist her aggressive pull. I actually wanted them isolated from the crowd. I allowed my parents to physically usher me away from the sparkling crystal chandeliers and the elegant string quartet. We stepped quickly through a set of heavy mahogany double doors into a secluded luxury parlor. The ambient noise of the grand gala faded into a muted, gentle hum. As soon as the wooden doors clicked shut behind us, the polite societal masks completely melted off their previously smiling faces instantly tonight. Deacon immediately stepped aggressively into my personal space, using his towering physical height to cast a dark shadow over me. He puffed out his chest proudly and adopted the booming, resonant pastor voice he used every single Sunday to command his loyal congregation. It was a deeply manipulative voice, designed specifically to intimidate and force absolute submission. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," he commanded, pointing a heavy, judgmental finger directly at my face. "Jamal is the absolute shining pride of this entire family. He is building a massive real estate empire that will secure our legacy for generations perfectly. He managed to marry into Chloe and her prestigious family, and they are genuine old money royalty. Her father is a highly respected oil tycoon. They are elevating our social standing in ways you could never even comprehend. You are not going to jeopardize his multi-million-dollar partnership just because you are throwing a childish tantrum over a failed marriage." I stood my ground, looking at the hypocritical man who had slammed a heavy door in the freezing faces of his own grandchildren. "You honestly think Jamal is building an empire?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady and cold. "You actually think Chloe comes from old money wealth?" Beatrice stepped forward aggressively, cutting me off before I could say another revealing word. "Do not you dare speak about your highly successful brother and his wife," with that bitter, jealous tone she snapped, smoothing the front of her expensive silk designer gown. "You have always been completely green with envy when it comes to Jamal. Ever since you were a little girl, you could never stand the simple fact that he was naturally gifted while you had to struggle constantly. He is a visionary leader and powerful creator today, Maya. You are just a divorced woman with 3 kids and 0 prospects, trying to drag him down to your miserable, pathetic level." The emotional gaslighting was so incredibly textbook, it was almost completely boring. They were frantically trying to rewrite our entire family history to fit their current desperate financial narrative. They urgently needed me to feel incredibly small so they could feel powerful and big. "We put a solid roof over your head for 18 long years. My father added, his deep voice thick with manufactured righteous indignation today. "We fed you, we clothed you, and we raised you. We gave you the highly prestigious family name you carry today. You owe us for every single breath you take. We are giving you a massive, generous opportunity to finally contribute something actually useful to this family, instead of just being a constant draining burden. Jamal is offering you $10,000 out of the pure goodness of his generous heart. You will take that pen, you will sign the trust release waiver, and you will walk out the back door of this luxury hotel quietly." I looked down at the massive mahogany table sitting in the room tonight quietly. A sleek leather folder sat perfectly positioned under a warm brass lamp. Next to it was a heavy gold fountain pen. They had planned this cruel ambush down to the exact microscopic detail. They desperately wanted to strip me of a $6 million birthright and hand it directly to a golden son who was currently drowning in $4 million of heavily hidden debt. "And what exactly happens if I simply refuse to sign that specific piece of paper?" I asked, casually tilting my head to carefully study their suddenly desperate, unhinged, and highly aggressive facial expressions together tonight. Deacon violently slammed his heavy fist down onto the leather folder, making the gold pen jump. "If you refuse to sign this legal document, I will unleash my entire legal team on you by Monday morning," he threatened, his eyes wide with absolute fury. "I will have my ruthless lawyers tie you up in court for the next decade. I will legally strip you of your rights as a beneficiary, and I will personally ensure you never see a single dime of stashed family money. We have the ultimate power and the political connections to completely bankrupt your pathetic life." I looked at the heavy gold pen resting on the leather folder. Deacon stood over me, breathing heavily as he waited for my total submission. He honestly believed his booming pastor voice would force me back into the obedient daughter I used to be. He thought I was still that broken woman standing on his freezing porch. I reached out and picked up the gold pen. Beatrice let out a long sigh of relief, muttering about how I was finally learning my place. I held the pen between my fingers, feeling its weight, and then I snapped it cleanly in half. Ink splattered across the pristine trust release document, ruining it completely. Beatrice screamed, jumping back to protect her silk dress from the dark ink. Deacon's face contorted with a level of rage I had never seen before. "You insolent, ungrateful child," he roared, his voice bouncing off the walls. I did not give him the satisfaction of a response. I pushed open the double doors and walked straight back into the blinding light of the main ballroom. I marched toward the center of the room, heading for the presentation stage. My parents scrambled after me, frantically trying to pull me back into the shadows, but we were already in the middle of the crowded dance floor. The wealthy investors turned their heads, their conversations dying out as they watched the prestigious family publicly unravel. Chloe, who had been holding court near the ice sculpture, saw us approaching. She immediately sensed that the private ambush had failed. Like a true opportunist, she instantly switched tactics. She decided to play the ultimate victim. Chloe rushed forward, placing a delicate hand over her chest, and raised her voice just loud enough for the affluent guest to hear every single word. "Maya, please stop this," Chloe cried out, forcing a fake tear to well up in her pale eyes. "Jamal and I offered you $10,000 to help feed your poor children. We know you are completely broke and struggling with your bitter divorce, but trying to extort us on our biggest night is just cruel. We are trying to build a real estate empire, and you are acting like a greedy, unstable woman. Why can you not just be happy for our success?" The ballroom went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Hundreds of wealthy guests stared at me, their faces a mix of pity and absolute disgust. They were ready to condemn the jealous, destitute sister trying to ruin a beautiful high society gala. I stood in the center of the room, wearing my custom emerald suit, and I began to laugh. It was a rich, powerful sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Chloe stepped back, her fake tears faltering as my laughter cut through her carefully crafted performance. "I am not trying to extort you, Chloe," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent ballroom. "I am simply rejecting a terrible business deal from a family of complete frauds." I raised my hand and signaled my lead assistant, who was standing quietly near the audio-visual booth at the back. I had instructed him to plug a secured encrypted drive directly into the hotel's main presentation system the moment I gave the cue. The digital screens behind the main stage, which were supposed to display the renderings of Jamal's new real estate project, suddenly flickered. The architectural designs vanished. In their place, a highly detailed, heavily redacted background check illuminated the entire ballroom in bright, glaring high definition. I turned to face the crowd, gesturing to the massive screens behind me. "Since we are discussing high society and old money royalty tonight, let us take a closer look at Chloe's prestigious background," I announced, my voice steady and commanding. Chloe told everyone in this room that her father is a billionaire oil tycoon from Texas. She claimed her wealth comes from an untouchable family trust. Let us see what the actual public records show. The screen transitioned to a glaring federal mugshot. The man in the photo wore a bright orange jumpsuit. The text below his face listed his current location and inmate number. "That is Chloe's father," I stated clearly. "He is not an oil tycoon. He is serving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for orchestrating a massive insurance fraud scheme targeting the elderly." The crowd gasped audibly. Wealthy investors dropped their jaws, turning to look at Chloe, whose face had drained of all color. She looked like a ghost trapped in a couture gown. But I was not finished. The screen transitioned again, this time displaying a complex financial web of debt obligations, credit reports, and loan guarantees. "You see, Chloe does not have a trust fund." I continued, pacing across the marble floor so everyone could hear me. "Chloe is completely broke. She maintains her country club aesthetic by juggling 20 different high-interest credit cards. In fact, she brought a massive hidden liability of $2 million into her marriage. And she secretly tricked my brother Jamal into co-signing that entire debt just 3 months ago." A collective wave of shock rippled through the affluent crowd. Deacon's congregation members covered their mouths in horror. The elite investors who were considering backing Jamal's real estate venture immediately stepped back, their faces twisting in utter revulsion. They realized they had been schmoozing with a woman who was nothing but a calculated, desperate con artist. Chloe stood frozen, her hands shaking violently. Jamal pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his custom tuxedo drenched in sweat. He stared at the massive screens, his eyes wide with absolute terror, as he read the financial documents proving he was legally bound to her hidden millions. The perfect, untouchable golden child had been played for a complete fool, and I had just exposed his humiliating reality to the entire city of Atlanta. The fragile house of cards was falling down so fast. Jamal spun around to face me, his custom tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a desperate man. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger in my direction. "You are a liar," he screamed, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny of the entire ballroom. You are a bitter, jealous liar, Maya. You fabricated these documents because you cannot stand the fact that I am successful and you are a failure. Chloe comes from a deeply respected family. We are incredibly wealthy. We just bought a multi-million-dollar ski mansion in Aspen last month. You are just trying to ruin my reputation because Marcus dumped you. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at him with absolute pity, shaking my head slowly as the wealthy investors murmured around us. You really are that delusional, Jamal, I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear over the sound system. You want to talk about your luxurious Aspen estate? Let us talk about it. I raised my hand slightly, signaling my assistant in the back of the room. The massive digital screens flickered again, replacing Chloe's disastrous financial records with a new set of highly detailed documents. I watched the remaining color drain completely out of Jamal's face. Projected in glaring high definition were dozens of short-term rental receipts, complete with cleaning fees and strict checkout times. You do not own a single brick in Aspen, Jamal, I announced, gesturing to the undeniable proof behind me. You have been renting that property on short-term leases for $2,000 a night just to take photos for social media. You staged an entire fake life to convince these investors that you were swimming in capital. You maxed out your last remaining business credit cards just to buy Chloe's cubic zirconia necklaces and fund her pathetic illusion of grandeur. The affluent guests in the ballroom let out a collective scoff. For high society Atlanta, there was nothing more offensive than a desperate, transparent fraud. The investors who had been shaking Jamal's hand 20 minutes ago were now actively backing away from him as if he were highly contagious. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man who lied about his basic assets. But I was not finished. I turned my attention away from my sweating brother and looked directly at my parents. Deacon and Beatrice stood frozen near the edge of the stage, their perfectly curated pastoral image shattering under the harsh fluorescent lights of the presentation screens. You always told me Jamal was the golden child, I said, walking slowly toward my mother and father. You told me he was a visionary developer. You told me he was elevating our family name, while I was nothing but an embarrassing burden. But Jamal is not a successful real estate mogul. Jamal is a complete and utter fraud, and he has been running a massive Ponzi scheme right under your noses for the past 2 years. Beatrice shook her head violently, her expensive hat trembling. Stop it, Maya, she cried out, clutching her pearl necklace. Stop telling these horrible lies about your brother. He is building an empire. He is building a graveyard, I corrected sharply, keeping my eyes locked on my father. To keep up with Chloe's demanding, fake, aristocratic lifestyle, Jamal needed millions of dollars in liquid cash. He needed to secure massive loans from secondary lenders to finance those luxury condo projects he kept bragging about. But Jamal had no actual collateral. His business was completely underwater. His credit was absolute garbage. So he had to find a high-value asset to leverage. I paused, letting the heavy silence wrap tightly around the room. I watched my father's chest begin to rise and fall with rapid, panicked breaths. Deacon was a businessman. He knew exactly what a desperate developer would do when backed into a financial corner. Jamal did not have any assets. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm volume. But you did, Dad. Deacon took a stumbling step backward. No, he whispered, his booming pastor voice reduced to a dry, terrified croak. No, he would never do that to us. I nodded slowly, signaling my assistant one final time. The screens transitioned to display a massive, legally binding commercial loan agreement. At the very bottom of the document, enlarged for the entire ballroom to see, was Deacon's unmistakable signature. Your golden boy forged your signature. Dad, I stated, delivering the crushing blow with absolute precision. 3 months ago, Jamal secretly forged your name to leverage your primary Atlanta estate as collateral for a high-risk $4 million commercial loan. He took the house you built, the house you slammed in my freezing children's faces, and he gambled it away to pay for Chloe's fake designer bags and their rented Aspen vacations. Beatrice let out a piercing, guttural scream. She lunged toward Jamal, grabbing the lapels of his sweat-soaked tuxedo. Tell me she is lying, Jamal, my mother shrieked, tears ruining her flawless makeup. Tell me you did not put our home up for a loan. Tell me we are not going to lose our house. Jamal could not speak. He just stared at the floor, his silence confirming every single word I had just spoken. He was completely paralyzed by his own monumental failure. You owe $4 million, I said, driving the final nail into their financial coffin. And you defaulted on that loan exactly 14 days ago. Your debt was considered so toxic that the original lenders immediately sold it off to a massive private equity firm. The bank is preparing the foreclosure documents right now. Your beautiful brick mansion, your cars, your entire legacy, it is all gone. Deacon clutched his chest, his face twisting in genuine physical agony as the reality of his total ruin crashed down upon him. He collapsed heavily into a nearby banquet chair, gasping for air, while Beatrice fell to her knees beside him, weeping uncontrollably into her silk gown. The perfect, untouchable family they had worshipped over my own well-being was entirely decimated. They finally realized that their precious, infallible golden boy had doomed them all to absolute poverty. The suffocating silence that settled over my broken parents was suddenly shattered by the sound of the grand ballroom doors swinging wide open. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. Walking through those heavy mahogany doors, radiating an absolutely sickening level of arrogance, was my ex-husband, Marcus. He strutted across the polished marble floor like he owned the entire hotel, wearing a custom-tailored velvet dinner jacket and a bright, predatory smile. Clinging tightly to his arm, wearing a highly inappropriate sequined gown that left very little to the imagination, was the exact same 22-year-old intern I had caught him in bed with 19 months ago. Jamal had secretly invited him. My brother, in all his petty vindictive glory, had orchestrated Marcus's arrival tonight, specifically to deliver the final psychological blow to my spirit. Jamal had planned for Marcus to parade his new younger relationship in front of the entire Atlanta high society crowd, assuming the sight of them together would finally break me down into a sobbing, hysterical mess. But Marcus was completely blinded by his own towering narcissism. As he walked toward the center of the room, he did not notice the sheer terror painted across Jamal's sweating face. He did not notice Chloe shaking in the corner, or my parents collapsed in absolute despair near the edge of the stage. He simply assumed the heavy, awkward silence in the ballroom was due to my embarrassing presence. He thought he was walking into a room where I was the pathetic, destitute victim begging my family for a $10,000 handout. He had no idea he was strutting directly into a meticulously rigged minefield. Marcus stopped a few feet away from me, wrapping his arms securely around the young intern's waist. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with familiar toxic condescension. He let out a loud theatrical sigh, making sure the affluent guests standing nearby could hear him. Maya, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Jamal warned me you might try to crash this beautiful gala and beg for money. I see you are still exactly the same bitter, jealous woman who tried to ruin my life 19 months ago. You really thought pulling your little investment fund would break me, did you not? You thought you could just kidnap my children and force me into bankruptcy out of pure spite. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually at my sides. I did not say a word. I let him take the rope and wrap it tightly around his own neck. Marcus turned away from me and addressed the wealthy investors in the crowd, playing the role of the triumphant, resilient businessman who had survived a crazy ex-wife. He reached out and smoothly grabbed a microphone from the nearby podium, determined to make his humiliation of me as public as humanly possible. I want everyone in this room to know that true talent and relentless drive always win in the end. Marcus announced proudly into the microphone, his voice booming across the ballroom. Maya tried to destroy my brokerage firm. She tried to drag my name through the mud. But tonight, I am standing here stronger than ever. In fact, I am thrilled to officially announce that my firm is in the final stages of being acquired by a massive global private equity powerhouse. He paused for dramatic effect, puffing out his chest. We are being acquired by Vanguard Holdings, he declared, grinning from ear to ear. Vanguard recognized the immense value of my portfolio. They saw my brilliant leadership. Once this multi-million-dollar deal closes on Monday morning, I will be stepping into a senior executive role with their backing. So Maya, your little temper tantrum failed completely. I won. The intern on his arm giggled, looking at me with absolute pity. She genuinely believed she had secured a wealthy, untouchable winner. Marcus turned his full arrogant attention back to me, lowering the microphone slightly, so his next words felt intimately cruel. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a failure." "Maya," he sneered, his tone dripping with malice. "You failed to keep your husband happy because you were too obsessed with controlling everything. You failed at your career. You failed at keeping this family together. Now you are just a sad, lonely woman trying to extort your own brother for a few $1,000s so you do not get evicted. But because I am a generous man, and because I am about to be backed by Vanguard Holdings, I will tell you what I am going to do. Once the ink dries on my new contract next week, I might throw you a few pennies for child support, just enough so my kids do not have to live in a homeless shelter while you figure out how to get a real job." The wealthy investors surrounding us shifted uncomfortably in their expensive shoes. They were staring at Marcus like he was a dead man walking. They had just watched me absolutely decimate Jamal and Chloe with military precision. They had just seen me project highly classified financial documents onto massive digital screens. They knew I held devastating power in this room, even if they did not fully understand the exact nature of my relationship with Vanguard yet. They could smell the impending doom, but Marcus was completely oblivious. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice in anger or shed a single tear of humiliation. I simply looked at the man who had broken my heart 19 months ago. The man who had kicked me and his own children out into the freezing rain, and I felt absolutely nothing but clinical cold amusement. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. I lowered the crystal glass from my lips, looked directly into Marcus's smug, triumphant eyes, and allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. I let the silence hang for just a moment longer before I started to laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle or a forced sound of defiance. It was a rich, powerful, and entirely genuine laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The sound caught Marcus completely off guard. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He had expected me to scream, to run out the back doors in tears, or to sink to the floor in absolute humiliation. He certainly did not expect me to look at him with a gaze so filled with pity that it made the wealthy investors standing around us shift uncomfortably in their tailored suits. I took a deliberate step toward him, closing the distance between us, and calmly reached out to take the microphone directly from his trembling hand. He was too stunned to resist. "Thank you for that incredible announcement, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the massive room. "I am sure everyone here is absolutely thrilled to hear about your impending acquisition. It sounds like a remarkable deal for a man who was facing total insolvency just a few short months ago. But since you are standing in front of Atlanta's most elite financial minds bragging about your brilliant business acumen, I have a very simple question for you. When you signed those aggressive acquisition papers, when you agreed to hand over every single controlling share of your failing brokerage firm, did you ever bother to look up the actual name of the individual acquiring you? Did you read the absolute final page of the executive summary to see who sits at the very top of Vanguard Holdings?" Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. The young intern, clinging to his arm, looked frantically around the room, suddenly realizing that the triumphant entrance they had planned was rapidly turning into a public execution. Marcus swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. "Vanguard is a massive private equity firm," he stammered, his voice lacking the booming confidence he had wielded just moments before. "They have a board of directors. They operate through proxy agents. It is a completely blind trust acquisition. I spoke with their lead acquisition manager. I know exactly what I am doing." "You spoke with my employees, Marcus." I corrected him, keeping my tone completely even and perfectly cold. "You spoke with the people I pay to handle desperate men who do not read the fine print. You see, Vanguard Holdings is not a blind trust. It is a highly strategic, heavily concentrated private equity firm. And while we do have a board of directors, the board answers to a single majority shareholder." I turned my attention away from my sweating ex-husband and looked toward the back of the grand ballroom. I gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The crowd naturally parted as a tall, distinguished man in a dark, immaculate suit stepped forward. He had been standing quietly in the shadows near the audiovisual booth all evening, simply observing the chaotic family drama unfold. This was Lawrence, the chief legal officer of Vanguard Holdings. He walked across the polished marble floor with the quiet authority of a man who held the financial fate of everyone in the room in his sleek leather briefcase. The wealthy investors recognized him instantly. A low murmur of absolute shock swept through the high society crowd as they realized the caliber of corporate power currently standing in their midst. Lawrence stopped a few feet away from me. He completely ignored Marcus, Jamal, Chloe, and my terrified parents. He turned his full attention to me, offering a deep, respectful bow. Madam Chairwoman, Lawrence announced, his voice carrying clearly over the microphone I held between us. All legal documents regarding the hostile takeover of the brokerage firm have been prepared exactly according to your specific instructions. The final transfer of assets is complete. We are just waiting for your official authorization to execute the liquidation protocols. The color completely drained from Marcus's face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He stumbled backward, his expensive shoes slipping on the marble floor. The young intern let out a sharp gasp and immediately dropped his arm, taking a huge step away from him, as if his sudden failure was contagious. Across the room, Jamal dropped his crystal champagne glass. It hit the floor with a loud, shattering crash, sending expensive liquor and jagged shards flying in every direction, but nobody even flinched. Deacon and Beatrice stood absolutely paralyzed near the presentation stage. My father clutched his chest, his eyes bulging in sheer terror, while my mother covered her mouth with both hands, suffocating a scream. I turned back to Marcus, holding his terrified gaze. "I am Vanguard Holdings, Marcus," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. 19 months ago, you threw me and your 3 children out into the freezing rain because you thought I was nothing without you. You thought you held all the power because you were the face of the company. But I took the assets I pulled from your failing business, and I built an empire. I bought distressed properties, I acquired toxic debt, and I became the majority owner of the very firm that just bailed you out of your massive financial grave. You did not secure a lucrative executive position tonight, Marcus. You just signed your entire life over to me. The silence in the ballroom became heavy, thick with the undeniable reality of his complete destruction. You came here tonight expecting to see a broken woman begging for scraps at her wealthy family's table. You brought your new girlfriend to witness my ultimate humiliation. Instead, you walked blindly into a trap that I carefully laid out for you 19 months ago. Your absolute arrogance was your greatest weakness. I stepped closer to Marcus, closing the final few inches of space between us, so he had absolutely nowhere to look but directly into my eyes. The entire grand ballroom held its collective breath. You could hear the faint ambient hum of the hotel air conditioning above us, but otherwise the silence was absolute. The wealthy Atlanta investors who just minutes ago had been eagerly shaking his hand and congratulating him on his brilliant business acumen were now staring at him like he was a walking corpse. You actually thought Vanguard Holdings was swooping in to save your pathetic legacy, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, but laced with a lethal dose of reality. You thought a massive global firm looked at your chaotic, mismanaged portfolio and saw a visionary leader. Let me explain exactly what happened over the last 19 months while you were busy trying to humiliate me and play the victim in your social circles. When I pulled the Phoenix Fund out from under you, you were bleeding out on the corporate floor. You panicked. You needed fast capital to keep the lights on and to keep buying expensive gifts for the 22-year-old girl standing next to you. So you started taking on mezzanine debt. You signed off on highly toxic short-term loans with astronomical interest rates just to maintain the illusion that your firm was still profitable. Marcus was sweating profusely now. Dark, heavy patches of moisture ruined the expensive velvet of his custom dinner jacket. He tried to open his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. His jaw simply trembled. What you failed to realize in your desperate scramble for cash. I continued pacing slowly around like a predator, circling wounded prey, is that the shadow entities purchasing your toxic debt all rolled up into one single parent company, Vanguard Holdings. I have been your primary creditor for over a year, Marcus. Every single time you signed a new loan agreement to keep your sinking ship afloat, you were signing another piece of your life directly over to me. I did not just acquire your firm. I orchestrated a systematic hostile takeover from the inside out, and you were too blinded by your own narcissism to even notice the noose tightening around your neck. I held out my hand without looking away from him. Lawrence, my chief legal officer, stepped forward and placed a sleek black leather binder into my palm. I opened it and pulled out the crisp, freshly signed acquisition contract that Marcus had been bragging about all evening. You love telling everyone here that you secured a lucrative executive position, I said, raising the document for the crowd to see. You bragged that you would be throwing me pennies for child support from your massive new salary. But according to Section 4, Paragraph B of this acquisition agreement, the one you eagerly signed yesterday, without bothering to have a competent lawyer read the attached addendums, Vanguard Holdings assumed your massive, insurmountable debts in exchange for 100% equity of your firm. I let the document fall from my hand. It fluttered to the polished marble floor, landing right on top of his expensive leather shoes. We are not paying you a multi-million-dollar buyout. Marcus, I stated, my voice echoing with crushing finality. We acquired your entire fraudulent collapsing company for exactly $1. I reached into the pocket of my custom emerald suit, pulled out a single crisp $1 bill, and dropped it intentionally at his feet. It landed right next to the legal contract that had sealed his doom. You have no executive position. I continued, driving the final nail into his coffin. You have no stock options. Your company car, your corporate expense accounts, your health insurance, and your title as CEO are all terminated effective immediately. Your entire life's work belongs to me, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it. You are officially, legally, and permanently bankrupt. The word bankrupt cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. The young intern, who had already taken a cautious step away from him, moments earlier, flinched violently. The illusion of her wealthy, powerful older boyfriend had just been completely obliterated in front of the city's elite. She looked down at the single dollar bill resting on the marble floor, then looked up at Marcus's sweating, terrified face. The reality of his absolute poverty hit her all at once. She was not securing a life of luxury and country club memberships. She was tethered to a disgraced, unemployed man drowning in debt. Without a single word of comfort, she turned her back on him. Marcus reached out his hand, shaking as he tried to grab her sequined dress. "Baby, wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "We can fix this. I can make it right." "Do not touch me," she snapped, swatting his hand away with absolute disgust. "I am not ruining my life for a broke man." She did not look back. She picked up the skirt of her inappropriate gown and marched straight toward the heavy mahogany doors, her high heels clicking rapidly against the floor. She walked right out of the ballroom, abandoning him completely in his darkest, most humiliating moment. Marcus was left standing entirely alone in the center of the room. The wealthy investors who had been his friends and colleagues were actively turning their backs to him, refusing to even make eye contact. He fell to his knees right there on the polished marble, collapsing under the crushing weight of his monumental failure. He looked up at me, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and streaming down his flushed cheeks. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice reduced to a pathetic, ragged whisper. "Please, you cannot do this. Think about our history. Think about Malik. Think about Kayla and Trey. I am their father. You cannot leave me with nothing." The mention of my children sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "Do not you dare speak their names," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous warning that made him flinch. "You forgot you were their father the night you left them standing in the freezing rain on a stone porch. You did not care if they had a roof over their heads when you froze my bank accounts and told me to beg for groceries. You tried to starve your own children just to teach me a lesson about obedience." I looked down at the broken man kneeling at my feet, staring at the single dollar bill I had given him. "I learned my lesson, Marcus," I said coldly. "And now you will spend the rest of your miserable life learning yours. Pick up your dollar and get out of my sight." Marcus scrambled on the marble floor, desperately searching for the single dollar bill. The Atlanta elite turned their backs in disgust. The atmosphere had shifted to a corporate execution. Standing near the towering ice sculpture, Chloe watched Marcus fall apart. Her pale eyes darted frantically around the room. The false bravado she had weaponized against me just an hour ago was completely gone. She possessed the razor-sharp survival instincts of a lifelong con artist, and she knew instantly that the ship was sinking. She decided to abandon her husband and the fabricated life she had built. She dropped her champagne glass, gathered the heavy fabric of her gown, and slowly backed away. She kept her head down, hoping the chaos surrounding Marcus would provide cover. She slipped into the dimly lit hallway leading toward the kitchen and service elevators. She thought she could simply vanish into the dark night, pack a bag, and find another wealthy target. But as she pushed hard against the brass handle of the wooden service doors, two large men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows. They were not hotel security guards. They were plainclothes federal detectives, and they had been waiting patiently for my signal all evening. They blocked the exit. The taller detective reached into his breast pocket and flashed a gold badge into Chloe's terrified face. He spoke her full legal birth name, a name she had aggressively tried to bury when she reinvented herself as a Southern socialite. He informed her that she was officially under arrest. Chloe gasped, her face flushing with a sudden violent shade of red indignation. She demanded they step aside, screaming they had the wrong woman. She threw her shoulders back, attempting to use her fake aristocratic privilege to intimidate them. She loudly proclaimed that she was the wife of a powerful real estate developer, and her father was an oil tycoon who would have their badges by morning. I walked slowly across the ballroom floor, the emerald green fabric of my custom suit catching the light from the chandeliers above. I stopped right behind the two detectives, looking at her trapped, desperate expression. "They have exactly the right woman," I stated, cutting through her hysterical demands. "Did you think I just brought digital presentations and corporate contracts to this party today? I brought an ironclad, meticulously documented legal portfolio directly to the federal authorities 5 hours before this gala even started." I turned slightly, raising my voice, so the remaining affluent guests and my paralyzed family could hear every single word. I detailed her specific crimes with absolute brutal precision. I explained Vanguard Holdings conducted a microscopic audit of Jamal's finances. We did not just find terrible real estate investments. We found a massive trail of wire fraud and severe identity theft. I locked eyes with my father, Deacon, who was still slumped in a banquet chair, clutching his chest. I did not just expose Chloe's fake background today. I revealed the most unforgivable crime she had committed right under his nose. The truth was finally laid bare for the entire world to witness. Chloe did not just trick Jamal into signing off on her hidden $2 million debt, I announced to the silent room. She systematically targeted you, Dad. She stole your personal social security number, your banking passwords, and your pastoral credentials. She used your community reputation to open massive fraudulent lines of credit in your name. She committed financial elder abuse. She bled your private retirement accounts dry to buy her fake diamonds, fund her ridiculous country club memberships, and maintain the illusion of wealth that you so eagerly worshipped. Deacon let out a hollow, agonizing gasp. The sound ripped from his throat as the reality set in. The high society daughter-in-law he championed over his own flesh and blood had robbed him blind. She had stripped away the very financial security he had spent his entire life building. The detectives moved forward, grabbing Chloe's arms to place the heavy steel handcuffs on her wrists. The moment the cold metal touched her skin, Chloe lost her mind. The delicate, refined facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She transformed into a feral animal. She thrashed violently against the officers, kicking her expensive heels and screaming vile obscenities that echoed off the hotel walls. As she twisted and fought to break free, the delicate fabric of her couture gown caught hard on the sharp edge of a nearby serving table. The material ripped with a loud tearing sound, splitting completely down her side. Her perfectly styled hair fell into a messy, tangled disaster around her flushed face. She looked absolutely pathetic. She screamed for Jamal loudly. She begged her husband to use his power to stop the arrest, pleading with him to call his lawyers and save her. But Jamal did not move a single muscle. He stood frozen in the dead center of the ballroom, staring at his screaming, thrashing wife with absolute paralyzing horror. The golden child was entirely broken. He realized in that exact moment that if he took even one step forward to defend her, he would be dragged right into the federal indictment alongside her. Self-preservation overrode any false love he had left. He remained perfectly still, silently watching the detectives drag his sobbing, ruined wife out through the service doors. The wealthy investors did not wait long. The air suddenly filled with the frantic, urgent sound of high society panic. Men and women in formal wear pulled out their cell phones, frantically dialing their personal attorneys, their wealth managers, and their public relations teams. They were loudly demanding that their firms immediately sever every single tie and erase any association with Jamal and his family. The glamorous real estate launch party had completely transformed into a chaotic financial crime scene, and my family was trapped right in the dead center of the wreckage, entirely stripped of their power and their pride. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind the detectives, sealing Chloe's fate and leaving a suffocating void in the center of the grand ballroom. The wealthy Atlanta investors, who had not already fled to the exits, were now huddled in tight, whispering circles near the coat check, frantically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of my family. The glamorous real estate launch party was completely dead. The ice sculptures wept onto the linen tablecloths. The string quartet had packed their instruments and vanished minutes ago. In the dead center of this spectacular wreckage stood Jamal, the untouchable golden child. The brilliant developer who was supposed to elevate the family name into the stratosphere. He looked absolutely pathetic. His custom-tailored tuxedo was drenched in cold sweat, clinging awkwardly to his shaking frame. He stared at the empty space where his fake aristocrat wife had just been dragged away in handcuffs, and then he slowly turned his terrified, bloodshot eyes toward me. He realized in that exact moment that his entire fabricated universe had just evaporated. He had no investors. He had no wife. He had no multi-million-dollar Aspen estate. He had absolutely nothing left, except a mountain of toxic debt owned entirely by the sister he had spent his entire life treating like garbage. Jamal's knees buckled. The pride of the family collapsed onto the polished marble floor right in front of me. He did not care that the remaining catering staff and hotel management were watching him. He crawled forward, reaching out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my emerald green suit. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward, refusing to let him touch me. "Maya, please," Jamal sobbed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "Please, you have to help me." Chloe manipulated me. She lied to me about everything. She made me take out those loans to keep up her image. I was just trying to make the family proud. I was just trying to be the man Dad wanted me to be. "You have the money now, Maya. You own Vanguard. You can wipe out the debt. You can make all of this go away. We share the same blood. I am your brother." I looked down at him, feeling a wave of absolute clinical disgust. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry that his fraudulent house of cards had finally collapsed under the weight of his own monumental greed. "We share the same blood," I repeated, my voice perfectly level and cold as ice. "That is a fascinating argument, Jamal. Let us talk about our blood for a second. Let us talk about the night. 19 months ago, when I stood on that freezing stone porch with 3 shivering children. They share your blood too, Jamal. Your own nephew and nieces were crying in the freezing rain because my entire life had just fallen apart. And do you remember exactly what you said to me when you walked out holding your crystal glass of champagne?" Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an escape that did not exist. "I was stressed," he stammered defensively. "Chloe was demanding, and we had the investor weekend. I did not mean it. You looked at Malik, Kayla, and Trey." I continued, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. "You looked at my freezing children, you looked at me, and you said there was no space for us. You said we would ruin the aesthetic of your pristine Italian leather sofas. You chose a piece of furniture over the safety of your own blood. You told me to go back to a cheating husband because a divorced sister was an embarrassment to your high society image." "Maya, I am begging you," he cried out, folding his hands together in a desperate prayer. "I will do anything. I will work for you. I will pay it all back. Just please do not let the bank foreclose. Please do not take everything I have built." "You did not build anything," Jamal, I stated, driving the reality of his failure directly into his chest. "You stole it. And I am not just talking about the $4 million you owe Vanguard Holdings. I am talking about the specific method you used to secure that capital. I gestured toward Lawrence, who stepped forward once again, opening a fresh legal folder. Did you honestly think a firm like Vanguard buys distressed debt without conducting a microscopic forensic audit of the original loan origination documents? I asked, watching the sheer terror paralyze his facial muscles. When my analysts reviewed your commercial loan application, we found several glaring discrepancies. The primary collateral listed was the family estate in Atlanta, but the signature authorizing the lien was deeply flawed. I knelt down slightly, bringing my face closer to his sweating, panicked expression. You forged Dad's signature, Jamal. You committed federal mortgage fraud. You committed wire fraud across state lines to secure funds from a secondary lender. You did not just make a bad business decision. You committed multiple felonies to fund Chloe's fake designer wardrobe. Jamal let out a strangled, breathless gasp. He looked over his shoulder at our father Deacon, who was still slumped in a chair nearby, clutching his chest and weeping silently as he listened to his golden boy's absolute destruction. As the majority debt holder, Vanguard is legally obligated to report any confirmed fraudulent activity discovered during our audits, I explained smoothly, standing back up to my full height. My legal team filed the comprehensive paperwork with the federal authorities 3 hours ago. You are not just losing your fake business today, Jamal. You are losing your freedom. The federal prosecutors are already drafting the indictment. No, Jamal screamed, burying his face in his hands, his entire body shaking violently against the cold marble floor. No, I am a respected developer. I am a leader in this community. I cannot go to prison. Your community reputation died the second I turned on those digital screens, I told him, offering absolutely zero mercy. Your pristine image is permanently destroyed. You are nothing but a common thief in a custom tuxedo. I turned my back on him. I did not care about his hysterical sobbing. I did not care about the shattered remnants of his fake empire. Jamal had spent his entire life standing on my shoulders to make himself look taller, and the moment I finally stepped out from under him, he plummeted straight to the concrete bottom. The golden child was officially a convicted felon waiting to happen, and I was the one who had personally handed the evidence to the prosecution. The sound of Jamal sobbing into the polished marble floor became nothing more than background noise. My focus shifted entirely to the edge of the presentation stage where my parents stood. Deacon and Beatrice were hyperventilating. The sheer magnitude of my revelation was finally penetrating their thick armor of denial. For 35 years, their sprawling brick mansion in the heart of Atlanta was the ultimate symbol of their untouchable status. It was the crown jewel of their carefully curated image. That house was where my father hosted powerful politicians after his Sunday megachurch services. It was where my mother threw her extravagant garden parties for the city elite. It was the physical manifestation of their pride, and now the reality was crashing down on them with suffocating weight. Jamal had secretly leveraged their sacred sanctuary to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle, and he had defaulted on the loan. Vanguard Holdings held the deed, and Vanguard Holdings was me. I owned the very roof over their heads. Beatrice was the first to completely snap. The woman who had spent her entire life obsessed with appearances, the woman who had reprimanded me for bringing my crying, freezing children onto her porch, because it might ruin her aesthetic, completely abandoned her dignity. She let out a ragged, breathless wail that echoed through the quiet ballroom. She stumbled forward, her expensive silk gown tangling around her legs. She did not just walk toward me. My mother dropped to her hands and knees right there on the ballroom floor in front of the remaining high society guests. She crawled toward me, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face. Her makeup was entirely ruined, running down her cheeks in dark streaks. She reached out with trembling hands and desperately grabbed the fabric of my custom emerald suit. "Maya, please," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "Please, my beautiful daughter, you have to save us. You cannot let the bank take our home. That house is our entire life. Your father and I worked so hard for it. You own Vanguard now. You have the power to stop the foreclosure. You can wipe out the $4 million debt right now. Just tell your lawyers to cancel the paperwork. Please, Maya, I am begging you. We are your family. I am your mother. You cannot throw us out into the street. We will have absolutely nothing left." She clung to my legs, sobbing uncontrollably, completely oblivious to the wealthy investors who were staring at her with absolute disgust. The matriarch of the family, who had always looked down on everyone else, was now a pathetic, desperate woman begging for her financial life. I did not reach down to help her up. I simply looked at my father. Deacon stepped forward, his towering posture completely gone. He looked like a shriveled, terrified old man. The booming, authoritative pastor voice he used to command thousands of loyal followers every Sunday had vanished entirely. He clasped his hands together in front of his chest, trembling violently. "Maya," he pleaded, his voice reduced to a dry, raspy whisper. "Maya, please show us some Christian mercy. We are standing before you asking for your forgiveness. The Bible teaches us to turn the other cheek to show grace to those who have wronged us. You have proven your point today. You have shown everyone how incredibly powerful you are. But you cannot destroy your own parents. You cannot take the home where you grew up. Show us the mercy that the Lord expects from a good, faithful daughter. Save our family home, Maya. I am begging you as a man of God." I stared at him, feeling a wave of absolute revulsion. He was trying to weaponize his religion against me, trying to use spiritual guilt to secure a $4 million bailout for his fraudulent son. When the religious manipulation did not immediately work, they pivoted to desperate, sickening flattery. The gaslighting shifted into full gear. "We always knew you were special," Maya Beatrice cried out from the floor, clutching my suit pants even tighter. "We always knew you were the smartest child we had. We pushed you hard because we saw your brilliant potential. We knew you had the strength to build an empire. We are so incredibly proud of you today. You are the true pride of this family, not Jamal. You are the one who is elevating our legacy." Deacon nodded frantically, stepping even closer. "Yes, Maya, you are our greatest achievement. We will change, I promise you. We will respect you. We will give you the seat at the head of the table. Marcus will never be allowed near our home again. We will do whatever you want, just please forgive the debt." I listened to their pathetic, frantic fawning. I absorbed every single desperate lie pouring from their mouths. They did not love me. They did not respect my intelligence or my strength. They only respected the massive corporate power I was currently wielding over their heads. They were bowing to my bank account, not to their daughter. If I had walked into this ballroom tonight as the struggling, divorced single mother they thought I was, they would have forced me to sign away my grandfather's trust fund without a single ounce of hesitation or mercy. They would have watched me and my children starve just to keep Jamal's fake real estate business afloat. Their sudden affection was nothing but a cheap, transparent transaction. They were trying to purchase a multi-million-dollar pardon with fake apologies and hollow praise. I looked down at my weeping mother and my trembling father, letting the silence stretch tightly between us as their desperate pleas hung heavily in the air. I let the heavy silence wrap tightly around the room. I looked down at my weeping mother and my trembling father, absorbing the absolute desperation radiating from their broken postures. For 34 years, these two people had completely controlled my sense of self-worth. They had dictated my value based entirely on how well I served their pristine public image. Now Beatrice was ruining her custom silk gown on the marble floor, and Deacon was clutching his chest like a frightened child. The wealthy investors and high society guests, who had not yet fled the ballroom, were watching in stunned fascination. The untouchable, flawless family that ruled Atlanta elite circles was publicly begging for their financial lives. Beatrice reached out again, her manicured fingers weakly grasping at the hem of my emerald suit. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her voice raw and hoarse. "We will do anything you ask. We will make it right. We will publicly apologize to you right now in front of everyone. Just please call your legal team. Stop the bank. You cannot let us lose our home. You know how much that estate means to our legacy." I did not step back, but I did not reach down to comfort her either. I stood as rigid and unmovable as a stone pillar. I looked directly into my mother's tear-streaked face, and then I shifted my gaze to my father, who was still gasping for air in the banquet chair. "Let us talk about legacy," I said, my voice echoing with a calm, lethal precision that commanded the attention of every single person left in the grand ballroom. Let us talk about the legacy of this family and the lessons you taught me 19 months ago. Do you remember that freezing Thanksgiving night, Dad? Do you remember the exact temperature when you opened your heavy oak door and looked at me standing on your porch? Deacon swallowed hard, his eyes wide with rising terror, as he realized I was not going to show him the Christian mercy he had just demanded. He slowly shook his head, unable to formulate a coherent response. I remember every single detail. I continued my words, cutting through the tense air like broken glass. I remember the freezing rain soaking through my thin wool coat. I remember 10-year-old Malik standing perfectly still, his teeth chattering so violently I could hear the sound over the howling wind. I remember little Kayla crying into my leg, her tears mixing with the icy rain, asking me if we were going to have to sleep in the car because her own grandfather would not let her inside. Beatrice let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. I did not know it was that cold, she cried out defensively. I did not realize you had nowhere else to go. We were just trying to protect the family from a public scandal. You knew exactly what you were doing, I stated, stripping away her pathetic excuses with absolute factual certainty. You looked at my freezing children, and you told me that my broken marriage was an embarrassment to your country club social circle. You told me that my pain was ruining the aesthetic of your investor weekend. You told me to go back and apologize to a man who had just betrayed me in my own bed. You chose a pristine Italian leather sofa over the physical safety of your own flesh and blood. I paced slowly around them, making sure my voice reached every corner of the silent room. You told me to grow up, Dad, I said, pointing a steady finger directly at his sweating, terrified face. You told me I needed to learn independence. You told me I needed to stop relying on a man to fund my existence and start acting like a responsible adult. You told me to protect the family image at all costs. You demanded that I stop being an impulsive burden and finally do something useful with my life. Deacon closed his eyes, fresh tears leaking out and tracking through the deep wrinkles on his face. Maya, I am so deeply sorry, he whispered, his booming pastor voice completely gone. I was a foolish, arrogant man. I was blinded by my own pride. Please show us the grace we failed to show you. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of them. I did exactly what you asked, I said, my tone perfectly devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. I learned absolute independence. I protected the family image by completely disappearing, so you would not have to explain my embarrassing divorce to your congregation. I built a multi-million-dollar empire from absolute scratch, so I would never have to depend on a man or a family who views love as a highly conditional financial transaction. I followed your instructions to the letter. Beatrice reached up, grabbing my hand with a desperate, crushing grip. Then save us, Maya, she pleaded, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. If you are so independent and powerful, now use that power to save your parents. Prove that you are better than we were. I slowly and deliberately peeled her desperate fingers off my hand, dropping her arm back to her side. I leaned down, bringing my face just inches from my weeping mother and my broken father. The ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to fade away completely, leaving only the heavy reality of the moment. When you slammed that heavy oak door in my face, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. I picked up my wet garbage bag of clothes. I walked back down your slippery stone steps to my car. Before I drove away to build the firm that holds your financial life in its hands, I made a promise. I whispered exactly 3 words. I leaned closer. Just wait, watch. I formally refused to bail you out. Business is business. My words hung in the chilling air of the ballroom. Business is business. Deacon stared at me with vacant eyes. Beatrice let her hands fall limply to the marble floor, the fight draining out of her body. They finally understood that I was not bluffing. The multi-million-dollar lifeline they desperately craved was officially cut. I turned my back on their weeping forms, prepared to signal my security team to clear the room, when a sharp, frantic voice echoed from the dim corner of the hall. Stop begging her right now, Mom. Get up. It was Nia. My younger sister stepped out from the shadows near the catering doors where she had been hiding ever since I exposed Chloe and Jamal. Nia had always been the family cheerleader, eagerly co-signing every single insult hurled my way to secure her own comfortable spot in the family hierarchy. Even now, standing in the middle of a massive financial crater, she refused to humble herself. She marched over to our parents, grabbing Beatrice by the shoulders and pulling her up from the floor. "We do not need her money," Nia declared, glaring at me with absolute venom. "We do not need Vanguard Holdings, and we certainly do not need to beg the disgraced sister who ran away to Chicago. You are all panicking over nothing." Jamal looked up from his spot on the floor, his face streaked with sweat and tears. "We owe $4 million. The bank is foreclosing on everything. We are bankrupt. We still have Granddad's money. We have the untouchable family trust fund. There is over $7 million sitting in that secure account right now. It was structured to protect the family legacy in case of emergencies. Well, this is an emergency. We can easily use that capital to pay off Vanguard Save the Estate and keep Jamal out of federal prison. We do not need a single penny from Maya. We will just bypass her entirely." Nia turned her arrogant gaze back to me, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "You thought you had us completely cornered, Maya," she sneered. "You thought you could just buy up bad debt and play God with our lives. But you forgot about the one pile of money you cannot touch. Granddad set up that trust for his loyal heirs. You abandoned this family 19 months ago. You have no claim to it anymore. We are going to liquidate those assets tomorrow morning, and you are going to walk out of here with absolutely nothing but a hollow victory." I stood perfectly still, listening to her frantic monologue. "You are right about one thing, Nia," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear. "Granddad did set up that trust with very specific, unbreakable conditions to protect the family legacy. But it's you, Jamal and Dad never actually bothered to read the legal stipulations attached to that money. You just assumed it was a bottomless piggy bank waiting to bail you out of your own stupidity." Nia frowned, her smug smile faltering just a fraction. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. I held out my hand. Lawrence, my chief legal officer, stepped forward and placed a thick blue legal folder directly into my palm. I opened it slowly, letting the suspense suffocate the room. Granddad was a brilliant self-made man, I explained. He included a strict solvency clause in the foundational charter of the trust. It explicitly states that any primary beneficiary who is facing federal indictment or who has defaulted on massive loans or whose primary assets are actively under foreclosure is immediately and permanently stripped of their fiduciary access. The spark of hope in Deacon's eyes instantly vanished. Jamal let out a small, terrified whimper. "You see the problem here?" I continued, closing the folder with a sharp snap. "Jamal is drowning in toxic debt and facing federal forgery charges. Dad, your entire estate is actively being seized by my bank because of the fraudulent collateral. Neither of you are legally solvent. Neither of you qualify to touch a single dime of Granddad's money." Nia took a step forward, her face flushing with panic. "Then I will claim it," she yelled. "I will authorize the liquidation myself." I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp expression that made her stop dead in her tracks. "You cannot authorize anything, Nia, because you are not the majority beneficiary. I am. Because I am the only legally solvent, financially secure heir left in this family. I petitioned the state courts exactly 3 weeks ago to take absolute unilateral control of the trust." I pulled a single stamped piece of paper from the blue folder and held it up high. "This is a final binding judicial ruling," I announced. "He ruled that you are all a catastrophic threat to the preservation of those assets." "No," she whispered. "No, you cannot do that. You cannot take everything." "I already did," I stated, driving the final nail into the coffin of their legacy. "I restructured every single penny of that $7 million. It is now legally locked behind an ironclad, impenetrable corporate charter." I walked directly up to my weeping mother, my broken father, my ruined brother, and my terrified sister. "It is officially registered as the Malik, Kayla, and Trey Educational and Wealth Foundation," I declared proudly. "The money can only be accessed by my 3 kids. It will ensure that the children you left freezing on a stone porch will never, ever have to depend on anyone else for the rest of their lives. I looked around at the four of them watching the absolute total despair swallow them whole. Jamal gets 0, I said, ticking them off one by one. Nia gets absolutely 0. Dad, Mom, you get absolutely 0. The safety net is completely gone. There is no bailout. You are entirely on your own. Nia let out a loud sob and collapsed onto the floor. The empire was secured for my children. The sound of Nia sobbing violently against the cold marble floor was the only noise coming from our immediate circle. But just beyond the shattered remnants of my biological family, the rest of the grand ballroom had erupted into a chaotic, buzzing hive of high society gossip. I looked past my weeping mother and my completely paralyzed father to see the affluent Atlanta investors frantically pulling out their cell phones. Nobody was stepping forward to offer Deacon a comforting hand. Nobody was rushing to help Beatrice off the floor. They were recording us. They were rapidly typing text messages and sending direct emails to their public relations teams. I could hear the aggressive, panicked whispers spreading like a wildfire across the room. Word was already leaking to the local press. The spectacular, catastrophic collapse of Deacon's prestigious pastoral empire and Jamal's massive federal fraud was entirely too juicy to stay contained within these 4 expensive walls. By tomorrow morning, the news of their foreclosed estate and Chloe's federal arrest would be the leading story on every single prominent blog and local news station in the state of Georgia. Their desperate attempts to hide their financial ruin from the congregation were totally destroyed. Their carefully curated, untouchable image was actively burning to the ground in real time, and the very people they had spent decades trying to impress were the ones happily pouring gasoline on the flames. Beatrice reached out one last desperate time. Her hands were shaking violently as she tried to grasp the empty air where I had just been standing. She screamed my name, presenting a horrific, jagged sound that begged for a sudden reversal of reality. But I did not bend down to comfort her. I did not stay to watch them weep in the center of their own manufactured destruction. I had spent 34 years carrying the suffocating weight of their toxic expectations, their endless criticisms, and their relentless demands. I was completely done carrying their heavy burdens. I smoothly adjusted the cuffs of my emerald green Tom Ford suit, feeling the crisp, expensive fabric against my skin. I turned my head slightly and caught the eye of Lawrence, my chief legal officer, who was standing ready with the Vanguard legal team. I gave him a single definitive nod. The operation was absolute and complete. There was nothing left for me to do here. Lawrence immediately tapped his earpiece, signaling my private security detail that we were moving out. 4 large men in dark, tailored suits instantly materialized from the perimeter of the ballroom, forming a protective, highly professional wedge around me. As I turned my back on my completely decimated family and began walking toward the heavy mahogany exit doors, the crowd of wealthy guests immediately parted like the Red Sea. They physically stepped back, pressing themselves against the catering tables to give me a wide, respectful berth. The investors who had previously sneered at the divorced single mother were now bowing their heads slightly as I passed by. They were terrified of accidentally making eye contact with the ruthless woman who had just acquired the very ground they were standing on. I walked with perfect, unwavering posture. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, providing a steady, powerful beat that signaled my absolute victory. I did not look back over my shoulder. I did not glance at the weeping, pathetic figures of Jamal and Nia. I simply kept my eyes locked on the exit, feeling a profound, breathtaking sense of liberation wash over my entire soul. Every single step I took toward those doors felt like shedding a massive, heavy chain that had been wrapped tightly around my neck since childhood. I was finally breathing clean air. The security detail pushed open the heavy brass handles of the Grand Hotel doors. I stepped out of the suffocating, tense atmosphere of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom and directly into the cool, crisp evening air of downtown Atlanta. The city lights sparkled brilliantly against the dark night sky. My waiting chauffeur-driven luxury SUV was idling quietly at the curb right in front of the massive entrance columns. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me, greeting me with a polite nod. I slid into the plush, warm leather interior of the vehicle, letting the soft ambient lighting wrap around me in quiet comfort. Lawrence slid into the front passenger seat, closing his thick legal folders with a deeply satisfying snap. He turned around to look at me, a rare, genuine smile crossing his highly professional features. "It is entirely handled," Madam Chairwoman, Lawrence stated quietly. "The foreclosure documents on the estate have been formally registered with the county clerk. The federal prosecutors have Jamal firmly in their sights, and the trust is completely legally isolated. Your family has absolutely no financial recourse left. They are completely locked out." I leaned back against the headrest, letting the quiet luxury of the vehicle soothe my adrenaline-filled senses. I did not pop a bottle of champagne. I did not gloat or cheer. I simply raised my left arm and pushed back the sleeve of my suit to look at my watch. It was exactly 8:15 in the evening. I smiled a warm, soft, and entirely genuine smile that had absolutely nothing to do with Vanguard Holdings' massive real estate acquisitions or toxic family drama. I tapped the glass face of the watch and looked up at my driver. "Take us straight to the private airfield," I instructed him, my voice lighter and happier than it had been in years. "The jet is fueled and waiting. If we take off right now, I will be back in Chicago just in time to read Malik, Kayla, and Trey their favorite bedtime story." The driver nodded, shifting the heavy vehicle into gear. As we pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the chaotic, burning wreckage of my toxic family's legacy far behind in the rearview mirror, I closed my eyes. I took a deep, beautiful breath of absolute, undeniable freedom, knowing my children were finally safe. 1,000 words. 3 weeks passed since that night at the Ritz-Carlton. The fallout was not just a quiet local rumor. It was a spectacular, highly televised implosion that rocked the entire Atlanta financial and social elite. I sat in my sunlit office in Chicago, reviewing the final asset transfer reports while sipping a perfectly brewed espresso. My Vanguard team operated with surgical precision, executing every single foreclosure liquidation and legal filing exactly as I had instructed. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I felt the profound cleansing relief of watching a diseased tree finally be uprooted from my life. Let us start with Marcus. The man who had sneered at me in a cheap motel room, threatening to starve his own children to force my obedience, was now learning the true meaning of financial desperation. Vanguard Holdings seized his brokerage firm and immediately liquidated the remaining viable assets. His reputation in the financial sector was completely obliterated. He was currently working a minimum wage retail job selling discounted cellular plans at a kiosk inside a dying shopping mall. He had to take the public bus to work because his personal vehicle was repossessed. The 22-year-old intern was long gone, and the affluent friends who used to drink his expensive scotch now pretended they did not even know his name. He was a ghost in the very city he used to think he owned. Then there was Chloe, the faux aristocrat who had mocked my status as a single mother and complained about my freezing children ruining her aesthetic, was no longer wearing couture gowns. She was wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Chloe was denied bail. The federal prosecutors considered her an extreme flight risk, given her extensive history of wire fraud and identity theft. She was currently sitting in a federal lockup facility awaiting trial. Her father, the convicted insurance fraudster, was entirely unable to help her from his own prison cell. There were no country club memberships behind bars. There were no catered brunches or cubic zirconia necklaces. Chloe was finally forced to face the reality of the fraudulent, parasitic life. She had lived completely stripped of the wealthy enablers she used to manipulate so easily. Her downfall dragged my brother Jamal right down into the concrete beside her. Jamal had spent his entire life being the golden child, believing his own fabricated hype. He thought he was a visionary real estate developer simply because our parents constantly inflated his ego. Now he was drowning under a massive mountain of federal litigation. Because Vanguard Holdings had officially handed over the irrefutable proof of his mortgage fraud and signature forgery, Jamal was facing the very real prospect of a lengthy prison sentence. He had absolutely no money left to hire a high-powered defense attorney. I was assigned a public defender who bluntly informed him that his only viable option was to plead guilty and hope for a reduced sentence. The pristine, successful image he had sacrificed my well-being to maintain was permanently destroyed. I was entirely ruined by his own desperate greed and his obsession with a woman who had used him as a human credit card. But the most poetic justice of all belonged to my parents. For 35 years, Deacon and Beatrice had valued their social standing above the physical and emotional safety of their own daughter. They had worshipped their sprawling brick mansion as a monument to their supposed greatness. Vanguard Holdings executed the foreclosure with absolute legal finality. My parents were given exactly 7 days to vacate the premises. They had to watch as moving trucks hauled away their expensive Italian leather sofas and crystal chandeliers to be sold at public auction to satisfy their remaining debts. The scandal completely shattered Deacon's pastoral empire. When the board of directors at his megachurch discovered that their esteemed leader was implicated in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme orchestrated by his own son, they demanded his immediate resignation. He was stripped of his title, his pulpit, and his generous salary. Beatrice lost her adoring audience. The wealthy high society women immediately cut all ties, refusing to be associated with a family of disgraced criminals. With no income, no savings, and their credit completely destroyed, my parents had absolutely nowhere to hide. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. The sprawling estate they had slammed in my face was gone forever. They were forced to experience the exact same terrifying financial instability they had so callously wished upon me and my children 19 months ago. In a last, desperate attempt to salvage their ruined lives, Beatrice tried to reach out to me. A handwritten letter arrived at my Chicago office exactly 1 month after the gala. The envelope was stained with tears. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she had been blinded by pride and that she and my father were suffering terribly in their new apartment. She pleaded for a second chance, asking me to open my heart and provide them with just a small monthly stipend so they could buy decent groceries and afford their utility bills. She tried to invoke the sacred bond of a mother and daughter. I did not read the entire letter. I did not shed a single tear over their miserable new reality. I handed the tear-stained paper directly to Lawrence. The very next morning, my Vanguard legal team issued a strict ironclad cease and desist order to both Deacon and Beatrice. The legal document explicitly forbade them from ever contacting me, my children, or my companies ever again, under the threat of severe legal prosecution for harassment. I severed the final, decaying thread that connected me to their toxicity. They had made their choices, and now they were forced to live in the ashes of the empire they had burned down themselves. I was finally free to build my own future. The morning sun rises over Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant golden glow across the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Chicago penthouse. It is a quiet, beautiful Tuesday morning. There is no screaming. There is no frantic checking of bank accounts. There is only the soft sound of jazz playing through the kitchen speakers and the smell of fresh pancakes sizzling on the stove. I stand at the Marble Island, watching Malik, Kayla, and Trey eat their breakfast before the driver takes them to school. They are wearing the crisp, neat uniforms of one of the most elite private academies in the city. But the clothes do not matter to me. What matters is the absolute, undeniable light in their eyes. They are laughing. They are safe. They are completely surrounded by a thick, impenetrable wall of love and security. The memory of that freezing stone porch in Atlanta is nothing but a distant, fading shadow. Malik is 14 now, thriving in advanced science classes and playing the piano with a passion that absolutely amazes me. Kayla is 12, leading her debate team and fearlessly speaking her mind, knowing her voice will always be heard and validated in our home. Trey is 9, a bundle of pure, unadulterated joy, who loves building complex architectural models out of blocks. They do not walk on eggshells. They do not measure their worth by how well they serve a fabricated family aesthetic. They know they are allowed to make mistakes, to be loud, to be entirely human. I have made it my ultimate life mission to ensure that they will never ever experience the toxic conditional love that defined my entire childhood. I broke the cycle of generational trauma the exact second I drove them away from that burning bridge. As I pack their lunches, a pair of strong, warm arms wraps gently around my waist from behind. A soft kiss lands on the top of my head. I lean back smiling as Dr. Harrison rests his chin on my shoulder. Harrison is a brilliant pediatric surgeon at one of the top research hospitals in the Midwest. He is kind, patient, and deeply grounded. We met at a charity gala I organized for Vanguard Holdings a little over a year ago. He did not care about my custom suit or my intimidating corporate title. He just wanted to talk about a youth outreach program I was funding. When I told him about my past, about the ruthless way I dismantled my ex-husband and my biological family, he did not shrink back in fear. He did not call me bitter or vindictive. He looked at me with profound respect and told me he admired my fierce ability to protect my children. Harrison is the absolute antithesis of Marcus. Marcus was an insecure, hollow man who needed to tear me down to make himself feel tall. Marcus was intimidated by my intelligence and threatened by my financial power. He needed me to be dependent so he could control the narrative. Harrison, on the other hand, actively celebrates my power. When Vanguard Holdings closes a massive multi-million-dollar acquisition, Harrison is the first person to pour a glass of champagne and toast to my brilliance. He never competes with me. He operates in his own highly successful lane-saving children's lives in the operating room, and he loves coming home to a woman who commands boardrooms. We complement each other perfectly. But more importantly, Harrison loves my children as if they share his own blood. He does not view them as baggage or an obligation. He spends his weekends teaching Malik how to play chess, attending Kayla's debate tournaments, and sitting on the floor, helping Trey build his elaborate block towers. He provides the steady, reliable, and unconditional fatherly love that Marcus entirely failed to give them. Last month, during a quiet weekend getaway to a cabin in Michigan, Harrison took me out to the edge of a frozen lake, got down on one knee, and asked me to be his wife. He had already asked Malik, Kayla, and Trey for their permission before he bought the ring. I said yes without a single ounce of hesitation. I am proudly wearing his diamond on my left hand, a beautiful symbol of a partnership built on genuine trust and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and deceit. Beyond Harrison, I have carefully cultivated an incredible network of chosen family. The corporate attorneys, the financial analysts, and the administrative staff at Vanguard Holdings are not just my employees. They are my fiercely loyal circle. We celebrate holidays together. We support each other through personal crises and professional victories. I have surrounded myself with strong, independent friends who value authenticity over appearances. We do not demand blind obedience. We do not weaponize our affection. We hold each other accountable with kindness and grace. I have learned the most valuable lesson of my entire life. Blood does not define loyalty. DNA does not automatically entitle someone to a front row seat in your life. True family is not something you are randomly born into. True family is something you consciously build with people who actively choose to show up for you, who respect your boundaries, and who bring peace to your spirit instead of constant, draining chaos. I watch Harrison walk the kids to the private elevator, giving each of them a tight, meaningful hug before the doors slide shut. The penthouse is quiet again. I walk over to the massive windows and look out over the sprawling, beautiful city of Chicago. The skyline stands tall and strong against the bright morning sky. I think about the scared, heartbroken woman I was 19 months ago, gripping the steering wheel of a cold car, wondering how I was going to survive the utter devastation of losing everything. I did not just survive, I built a beautiful, peaceful fortress of absolute security. My children will grow up knowing unconditional love, absolutely. As the day slowly transitions into evening, the vibrant energy of my home settles into a profound golden quiet. The camera slowly pulls back, framing me against the stunning Chicago skyline as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. The sky is painted in brilliant shades of amber, deep violet, and burnt orange, reflecting off the endless glass of the surrounding skyscrapers. I stand perfectly still in the center of my penthouse living room, completely at peace. There is no more running. There is no more fighting for a seat at a table where I was never truly wanted. I look out over the vast, shimmering city, and I think about the millions of people out there who might be standing on their own freezing porches right now, clutching their own plastic garbage bags, wondering if the pain they are feeling will ever end. I want to speak directly to you today. We are conditioned from the exact moment we are born to believe that family is an unbreakable sacred bond. We are taught that blood is always thicker than water, that we must unconditionally honor our parents, and that we must always forgive our siblings simply because they are our flesh and blood. But absolutely nobody ever teaches us what to do when that very same blood slowly becomes a deadly poison. Nobody ever tells you how to survive when the people who share your exact DNA are the very ones holding the sharpest scissors to your safety net. I spent 34 years twisting myself into agonizing knots, desperately trying to shrink my ambition, my deep intelligence, and my fierce spirit, just to make my biological family feel comfortable. I accepted their tiny, pathetic breadcrumbs of affection, and I foolishly convinced myself it was a massive feast. I let them cast me as the difficult, impulsive black sheep because it was so much easier for them to blame my existence than to confront their own massive, glaring inadequacies. When I finally decided that my children and I deserved something infinitely better, when I finally established a hard boundary they could not cross, they immediately labeled me the ultimate villain of their story. They spun a frantic, desperate narrative of my supposed cruelty just to justify their absolute betrayal. I am here to tell you right now to let them call you the villain. Let them sit in their rapidly diminishing social circles and whisper about how cold and calculating you have suddenly become. You must fundamentally understand that their extreme anger is not actually about you at all. Their anger is exclusively about their sudden, terrifying loss of control over your life. When you firmly stop volunteering to be their reliable emotional punching bag, when you absolutely refuse to fund their shallow delusions or absorb the heavy consequences of their reckless mistakes, they will panic. They will aggressively try to guilt you, manipulate you, and ruthlessly drag you back into the dark, suffocating little box they purposely built for you. Do not ever let them win. You owe absolutely nothing to people who only choose to love you when you are perfectly convenient and entirely compliant. True love and genuine family connection do not ever require you to set your own soul on fire just to keep their fragile egos warm. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of malice or revenge. It is an act of profound, radical self-preservation. It is the defining moment you finally decide to become the fearless hero of your own beautiful life instead of remaining a silent casualty in theirs. You have every right to protect your peace, your children, and your hard-earned assets from anyone who attempts to exploit your inherent kindness. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you are the designated scapegoat of your own family, if you are the one who is constantly overlooked, repeatedly underestimated, and entirely unappreciated, please hear my words very clearly today. Do not waste another single ounce of your precious, valuable energy begging for their validation or their basic respect. Do not scream, do not argue, and do not try to desperately make them see your true worth. They are deeply and permanently committed to misunderstanding you, because seeing your true value would force them to acknowledge their own massive failures. Instead, I want you to take a deep, calming breath, quietly pack your bags, and walk away into the night in absolute perfect silence. Use the crushing heavy weight of their cruel rejection as the ultimate unlimited fuel to build your own massive empire. Focus entirely on your own personal growth, your deep emotional healing, and your absolute financial independence. Work relentlessly and tirelessly in the quiet shadows while they are far too busy gossiping and pretending in the light. Transform your agonizing heartbreak into an unstoppable driving force that propels you forward into a future they cannot even begin to comprehend. And when you finally reach the very top of your mountain, when you have successfully constructed a beautiful, unshakable life, filled entirely with a chosen family who actively celebrates your immense power, never ever apologize for your well-deserved success. Never apologize for simply outgrowing the small toxic tables that blatantly refuse to give you a proper seat when you needed it the most. Do not let their absolute inability to love properly ever dictate your boundless capacity to thrive. You survived their darkest emotional winters, and now you get to bask entirely in the magnificent warmth of your glorious summer. You have completely earned every single radiant moment. You are the sole author of your own destiny, and you hold the absolute power to write a beautiful, victorious ending to your story. The camera holds perfectly still, capturing my serene, victorious smile as I look proudly out at the endless glowing horizon, holding my head high and completely free. The screen slowly and peacefully fades to a quiet, powerful, and beautiful black.